It's rooted to like problem solving, which is like when you have a complex problem to solve, you break it down into small problems. This is the guiding principle. So agentic AI or just normal generative AI or like even traditional machine learning models, all of them plays a role in this in terms of solving those small problems.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our SecOps product launch series here at Human Managed. I'm Deborah, and today we have Jesum, our chief engineer, as well as Saleem, our founder, again, for the second time with us today to talk about the technical parts of SecOps. So, hi guys.
Hello.
Nice to have you guys back. Before this, I had a conversation with Karen, our CEO, as well as Saleem about kind of the business perspective on SecOps. But I think what's also interesting is the technical portion of SecOps. So we've heard that SecOps is a cybersecurity platform service, and the how it works with AI, how it works to have context and like reduce exposure, as Salim put it. So tell us about the build process of SecOps. Like, how did you get started, and how did you like come up with a plan?
I think we had a lot of whiteboarding sessions, a lot of discussions before we finally settled on a way to deliver this service to our customers. There were a couple of iterations as well, but the basic idea is very simple. We collect data, and this is the same across all the services that we deliver. We collect data, we process the data, and then we send meaningful results from the data to our customers. And we also allow customers to come back and interact with that data that we have processed into a meaningful form for the customer. So that's roughly how we do that processing for all our services. And SecOps is no different.
So to drill down slightly deeper into that, so when it comes to SecOps, security operations is like you receive an alert and you need to do something with it. So it's all about when you talk about data, this is basically an alert which you receive. And this is going to be a time sensitive alert, which means you need to process this in real time. So as we receive the alert, we need to understand what this alert is. We need to add more details for this alert, which is what like we call enrichment. And once we have this, we will bring in context from the customer who we are monitoring, as well as like any type of like asset information which is already there in that alert. And lastly, we will come up with the recommendation to solve this. So these are basically the four different steps which we do. So we figured out a way to receive the alert as fast as we could, and then structure it in a certain way where we could actually enrich those alerts, as well as then like start adding more context which we have built over historical data. And then finally we just like come up with the recommendation. So this time window of like when we receive the alert and by when you provide an action to the customer is the process which we actually do. So how does the user, which is the customer, receive this is the moment we process it, they could either receive it as a what we call as a messaging product, which is they could receive a notification, or they could actually see this on an on as a report in the app, or they could actually interact with it. So as soon as like we have done the processing, there are four different products which we actually have for the customer to interact with. So the first one is the data product, which is made available via an API. So once we done the processing, this data can be accessed and the customer or the user can do whatever they want to do with it. The second one is the customer or the user receiving a notification or a dispatch. So this is something which we have formatted in a certain way where the customer will receive a notification, and this is like really time sensitive, as well as a recommendation, which is what we call a dispatch. So we call this the messaging product. The third one is the app product. This is where like the customer would be getting most of the reports around what was the alert, what is actually the historical information, what is the trend. And lastly, we have an AI product where the customer could communicate with the data through natural language search or natural language chat. So this basically is how we have built the SecOps system.
So I guess that kind of gives like an overview of the kind of like compartments of SecOps. But Jesum, you mentioned that there were a lot of iterations, right? So what was your biggest pivot in building this product?
There were quite a
Would you?
lot of pivots. We went through different iterations of tools, different iterations of the way the data would flow. And also, I think the most complicated part of this whole thing was different iterations of the JSON schema that we wanted to represent the data. The JSON schema was quite critical to us because that's where we bring a lot of value add into the data for the customer. So we don't just take the data and change a couple of bits and pieces of data, change the wording, and then send it off to the customer to let them know, as Saleem was saying, as a notification to say, hey, you have some incident that's happening. No, we don't. We actually add a lot of enrichment into it. And every single bit of enrichment that we add in has a JSON schema behind it. And again, every single one of those is a value that we bring to the table for the customer. We put all that together, and finally, we can then produce that, as Saleem was mentioning, the app interaction, the messaging interaction, and the AI interaction, so that the customer then understands that we are not just doing a catch and pass of alerts for the customer.
So if I may clarify, for your AI component, do you use other platforms' AIs, APIs? Or is it all from scratch? Is it in-house?
It's a combination of both. So let's say the first type of service which we offer in the SecOps is a triage service. So once an alert comes in, when I talked about like we try and enrich, what we do is like we take that alert and we gather more information about this specific thing. So let's say, for example, if I receive an IP address, I will get more information about that IP address. Where is this from? What country? And more details about that. Now I have like 10 more details of this IP address, which I will use and I will start extracting what we call as features, which is these are information about that IP address, what its trend analysis is over the past 24 hours and past 1 hour. So that's basically one feature. Likewise, we extract multiple features from the alert. Now we use these feature and calculate very specific output, which is what we call labels. So based on the trend, I would say something is happening more frequently. Now that's a label. So in to calculate this label, we use models. So let's say example of a model is like let's say logistic regression. So we would actually run it through that, come up with a score, and assign a score. Likewise, we will calculate multiple labels, which would help in taking a decision. Once the decision is taken, it needs to be explained to the analyst or the customer. So there we use a different type of AI, which is what we call the front end AI. This is where we use the generative AI models such as like OpenAI, Claude, to explain what was the analysis which was done and what was the reasoning which was done. So these are a combination of two. So we do use multiple models, open source models, as well as commercial models. Depends on like what is the purpose of the communication which we are doing or the calculation which is happening.
I see. Okay, I think that's really interesting because I feel like a lot of like platforms and startups and stuff either use all of like commercial models or they kind of just like create their own from scratch and then that's their product, right? So in creating all of this, like there must have been many challenges because it sounds like a very comprehensive platform service. And in that, there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of effort and thought and iterating that went into it. So for Jesum specifically, since you're the chief engineer, like what would you say was your biggest challenge in trying to achieve what you have achieved with SecOps?
It's not so much rocket science as it is discipline in doing this. There were a couple of areas that we really needed to get good at. The first one is describing the data in a way that the machine can understand. The second one is a very repeatable iterative process to do that test without blowing through our budget. Because as you know, these models can get very expensive. And with the amount of data that we process, we can easily rack up the bill quite a bit. And then I think the third one is uh, I don't know if you've seen this, but sometimes when someone gives you too much choice, when you really want to format that final piece of presentation to the customer, should it be green? Should the font be this? Should the word say A instead of B? That was also a little bit tricky because that final message is being produced by the platform to the user, and we need to make sure that the user finds it useful and there's no ambiguity in it. So these three areas for us were something that we had to pay a lot of attention to when we were building the platform.
So to jump into that, what Jesum is talking about is more of like how do you customize and personalize this to the customer, to the user, about like the communication, the notification. So customization has always been a problem when it comes to service delivery as well as integration. This is also a place where we use AI, which is we declare it. So it's more of a declarative solution rather than prescription. So we declare what is required to the AI and it comes up with it. We finalize that, we ground it, and then the notification design is already done. So this is where we use AI in terms of understanding the data and then personalizing it for the user and then repeating it a million times.
Yeah, actually, I'll add one point to that. Grounding was quite critical to us. It's sort of like a slider bar between being very generative versus being very grounded. And there's a trade off where you don't build a lot on the platform because you let the model take care of it. That's to this side where it gets generative and creative, versus you build more rules into the platform so that whatever the AI produces is more consistent. So we had some situations where we found, for example, if we ask the AI to do some calculations, it sometimes gets it right, sometimes gets it wrong. It's a very basic calculation that even a 12-year-old would be able to get it. But that's the nature of generative AI today. And so for those situations, we don't use the model to do that. We actually use statistical models to do those calculations. And then we use that to ground the model, the AI model, to produce the final output.
Okay, so I'm seeing some common themes here, which is that there's a lot of like thorough, but and sometimes not AI analysis and like detailed work that goes into it, right? Because I think the assumption that a lot of people have is like, oh, you just like throw AI at it, throw it at AI, and then. But I think like hearing about how you actually have to like iterate and like plan all the steps to create this SecOps service that might, kind of run on AI, like to some extent, is very interesting because I've never really like heard it in depth about how these things are created. And I think it's also a good reminder that like we still need people with the expertise to who knows how to get to the goal product. And so just to wrap up with this particular video, what would you say are like the main guiding principles in this whole creation process?
So
Wow. Yeah, you
I'll
want to
go. So
take
like
that?
it's rooted to like problem solving, which is like when you have a complex problem to solve, you break it down into small problems. And once you have that, now you focus on the small problems and then figure out a solution and how the solution can actually be executed using the fastest possible way. So, like either use a generative AI model or a statistical model. And finally, once you have solved most of these small problems, combine them back and then present it. So, this is the guiding principle. So, agentic AI or just normal generative AI, or like even traditional machine learning models, all of them plays a role in this in terms of solving those small problems. That's basically the guiding principle. Jason?
I actually saw a survey on LinkedIn, I think about 3 days ago, where somebody asked, what do you think would be the most important skill set for people in the future? And they had a list of about 4 or 5 things. And there were the survey, the number one skill set that people say was most important was AI. You need to know how to use AI. The number two skill set, which was about 10% behind AI, was problem solving. I actually think problem solving is the first one before you even come to AI, because there's two very, I would say, things that we need to be careful of when we look at AI. The first one is, if you don't solve the problem and you give it all to the machine to generate, you go back to that slider bar problem where simple things the machine will get wrong because it literally hallucinates. And the second thing which you need to know is, when the machine gives you back the result, you absolutely need to be a subject matter expert in what you want the machine to do to be able to verify the output. Because we use AI every day and we see so many times the machine give us some random answer that absolutely makes no sense at all. And when you challenge the machine and say, hey, this is wrong, why did you put it in here? You get the typical response, you are absolutely right. This response is wrong and I
Yeah.
will remove it.
It's like, why didn't you realize that in the first place if you now say that I'm
Correct.
absolutely right? I agree with you though. I feel like if you don't have problem solving skills, then you can't really use AI properly to solve your problem because you don't know how to solve problems in the first place. Like, I think AI is like a tool, like you said in the previous episode, like many weeks ago. Yeah, that it's problem solving is definitely something that we have to keep keeping in mind and keep like developing, and don't forget about it just because we have AI to so-called help us. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Gave us a glimpse into like the technical parts of building SecOps, and it's very exciting. Sounds really cool. I mean, I haven't seen it in operation for myself yet, but hearing all this is like, wow, like I can do so many cool things. And to those who watched all the way until here, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And we post videos every week, so we will be back with more product launch videos very, very soon. Bye.
Bye.